Thank you for that video. Very inspirational messages coming through. I'd like to move on now to our next session. I'm delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, Patrick Vernon, OBE, is the Associate Director of Communities at the Centre for Ageing Better. Patrick has over 20 years of senior experience working across mental health, public health, heritage, and race equality, and is well known in health, local government, and the voluntary sector. He was awarded an OBE in 2012, and he was awarded an honorary PhD at Wolverhampton University in 2018. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Patrick. Patrick, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's really fantastic to be. It's a really fantastic event where people are sharing experiences. And you know what? It's the timing of this report is really, really important. So I commend everyone that's been involved in the whole research, the people that's been interviewed, everyone. It's about collective co-production, and I think that's really important, especially moving forward. As Attis mentioned, I work at the Centre for Ageing Better, and I've got some of my colleagues online. I think Emily, maybe Catherine, some others. So you know, we're all here to support the launch of this report. We believe at the Centre for Ageing Better that connected communities, which is one of our priority goals, are an important aspect of ageing in Britain. We recognise that being part of a community can be good for your well-being and has intrinsic and extrinsic values which give a sense of belonging, identity, especially for neighbourhoods and in communities as well. And that's why we believe that the whole aspect of communities is really, really important, along with our other priority areas around employment, housing and health altogether, which are the key aspects of ageing better in Britain. Also, we have to recognise all this work needs to take place, not at a national level. It's actually happening at local level in neighbourhoods, and it's making sure that in the context of this report around social infrastructure, that social infrastructure is working and meeting the needs of communities, and also recognising other aspects which support in social infrastructure around planning, transport as well. So I welcome this report. The report is, and the timing of this report is really important because social infrastructure has been debated over the last several years, and I think COVID-19 has made it even more critical and important around the role of social infrastructure, and particularly in the context of Black and minority ethnic communities and ageing and ethnicity as well. I know there are a number of commissioners and funders on this line, so I'm not saying get your wallets out right now, but this is about taking this work to the next level. I think this is really, really important. And I think the report findings around the context of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter makes further the business case, the moral case, the equality case around investing money into BAME-led community organisations and in the wider aspect of inclusion around ageing in Britain. This is really, really critical in terms of tackling structural racism and inequalities in society. I think the report itself provides a number of challenges which I've touched on in my forward to the report, which I just want to which we're going to use some of these as prompts in the breakout sessions when I finish in the next few minutes. So I think in the context of COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and the issues of discrimination, which has an impact for older people, BAME communities as they get older, I think these are the key challenges. I think there's something about food security, cultural appropriateness around hot meals, delivery, transport as well, and the role of food in culture. Often that is always ignored, not valued, not respected, but food is important in terms of culture, expressing identity, sharing, networking. And obviously COVID-19 has had a big impact in terms of not having the opportunity to go to community places, religious places, to share food, break bread, and to connect. So, but this is still important. We don't want to lose that. And the more work done that, there's been some research work done on community kitchens. What's been quite clear around COVID-19, food has been really critical. You know, each local authority area have had their food distribution centres, the food banks. But on top of that, BAME-led organisations and the faith community have stepped to the plate and provided cultural appropriate food where it's not been there available in a national menu for people being shielded. It's all very well to have spam and baked beans, but we want other stuff beyond that, don't we, guys? I think community testing is going to be an ongoing issue. We know that there's a second wave happening already in certain parts of the country, especially in Greater Manchester, the north, and parts of the southwest and others, and southeast. You know, there is the issue of many local lockdowns. You know, but we need to make sure there's proper community testing. I've had lots of dialogue with Baroness Dido, who is the chair of NHSX, now new chair of this new agency taken on Public Health England. And she is aware that more needs to be done around how you communicate the NHS testing service in community languages, having testers and people working with reflect the diversity of the communities to be part of that process. I think it's ongoing work as well. And also we recognise that COVID-19, even though it had a massive impact on people in care homes, is actually having a major impact between people aged between 50 and 70, which is a cohort that we are working towards a Centre for Ageing Better around improving people's life, quality of life as well. We also recognise that mental health and well-being is really, really critical. We know 50,000 plus people have died in Britain with COVID-19. I have lost a family member of COVID-19, and I'm sure some of you might have similar experiences. In the BAME context, we don't know the actual numbers of people who've died of COVID-19, but let's assume 1 in 3 from people of colour have died. That means at least 15,000 people have died in 3.5 months. This has a massive impact on communities. So the whole issue around bereavement, around making it culturally relevant, culturally sensitive, and meeting religious needs is really important. The whole stuff around people, the impact of lockdown on people's mental health and well-being. We already know there's a disproportionality already in the mental health system for BAME communities. We need to make sure that, particularly as people get older, mental health services are there, available for them as well. The other thing also is around the hostile environment. I was actually in the workshop around asylum, older people in asylum, and some of you might know I've been involved in the Windrush scandal. But the hostile environment is a major issue. People don't talk about it. It has a disproportionate impact on BAME communities. The fear, the culture of fear and intimidation is there in communities, and that's really important. I mean, I know it's not in the premise of this report. It's about the wider government policy, but the impact and legacy still has an impact. We have to acknowledge that as well. And I think the point around the voluntary sector, social enterprises, faith groups, BAME-led organisations, as well as mainstream charities. We know billions of pounds have gone through the door of government, lottery, National Emergency Trust, and other organisations, philanthropists, to support the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of supporting immediate support. Ubele, who I'm working closely with, produced a report a few months ago, estimating 9-10 BAME-led organisations were closed down because they had no reserves. And I think government and big lottery and other agents have heard that call. But what about the medium term? What about the long term? How are we going to invest? And in this report, it identifies some innovative ways, not completely innovative, because some of the stuff some people have been doing. I remember doing this stuff 20 years ago in health action zones, you know, around collaboration, around partnership working. It's almost like we have to kind of remind ourselves of all the good stuff that we've lost. But how can we be flexible in the role of commissioners and funders to foster collaboration, partnership working, and to break down this the role of tendering processes, which divides community groups, creates competition and lack of trust as well. There's, so there's a whole range of things. And then the final point is around digital divide. We know that there has been a digital divide. We need to make sure that gap is narrowed. So those communities who don't have access, and maybe all of us were lucky, we're online today, but those people who are online, how will they get the information and the needs to support them, especially as we move forward? And this is quite a key area around digital divides and BAME communities. More work needs to be done on that. I think the Centre for Ageing Better, as an organisation, as a think tank, and yes, and we are lucky to have an endowment so we can use influencing policy and thinking around the area along with other national organisations. We are going through an internal process. Yes, Black Lives Matter has been a wake-up call for us and for other organisations. Everyone's reviewing their policies and strategies, and we need to make sure that age and ethnicity is at the heart of all the work that we are doing especially those who have resources and leverage and influence, and to develop that dialogue between the needs and the lived experiences of BAME communities. And so they play a key role in co-production and in leadership so we can work together. So these are kind of key messages. I commend the report. I hope that this report will have the desired impact to influence lottery and other key strategic funders to revise, to update, and to consider new round of funding to support the ageing and ethnicity process in Britain. We launched a report just last week around the impact of employment and ageing, and the disproportionality in terms of the ethnicity pay gap as you get older. It gets wider and gets wider, as well as the wealth gap. So we've got a lot of work to do, guys, and that's why now we're going to go into workshops, because part of this thing that we want to explore with you is some of the things I've identified in the report and I've shared with you just now. We want to have a session to go through that. So I think you've already been assigned some breakout rooms, which you'll go in automatically. When you go into your breakout room, it'd be fantastic if you can choose one person to report back in terms of the question that we've given you. And then when we come back after the session's over, that one person who's been assigned to give the feedback, if you could put in the chat when we get back to the main part of this room again, just put in the chat the key issue, the one thing that as a recommendation or something that should happen, and I can look at that, and we'll use this as part of the conversation towards the plenary session as well. So I just want to hand over to Atia, the chair, and just to say the report's really important, the timing is perfect. How can we now use this report to influence at a local level, sub-regional level, at a national level to support more investment, more funding, and the role of social infrastructure, how it can add value to BAME communities. Thank you. So can I make a suggestion, if the chair allows it? Can anyone from any of the groups just simply share what was the key things that came after the conversation? We probably could take a couple. Anyone at all? Just unmute and just say your group.
Do you want me to feedback, Patrick?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Right, okay, so our group was to do with mental health. And to be fair, we actually, mental health and well-being, so we didn't actually sort of look at the question, but we talked about mental health and well-being as in the concern about bereavement, the loss, their peer group shrinking, how that affects their mental health, and the loss of freedom as well as isolation with the BAME community. And then Sophie fed back in relation to the report that even though there wasn't anything that talked about depression or anything in there because of the language they used, they still talked about wanting space and time for themselves, especially green space, which is beneficial to their health and well-being. And Kathy fed back about online stuff as well. But there was quite a lot of, which we did talk, but then we ran out of time, which I think a lot of people did run out of time.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for that, Karen, for sharing that. So some people have put some stuff in the chat. So let me just see. We've got group 5, which talked about funding, talked about the insecurity of relying on grants. We like the idea of aiding Camden's providing infrastructure support and commissioning smaller BAME organisations. Is there anyone else that wants to share verbally what came out of your conversation?
Hi, Patrick.
Yes. Hi, John.
In Group 4, we looked at housing and social support, housing support and social support. And one of the things that we identified was the need to trust communities and trust community leadership in those places to try and understand and articulate the challenges that people are facing. Because often when asking for support, especially to an outsider and authority, people can be defensive about their situation, but a good community organisation with intelligence about what's needed can actually help to understand what is required. But also, when people are changing housing, you need to look at the social structures around them rather than just the physical housing they're moving into and the kind of shared spaces that people might need as somebody who's moving into a new to housing, and the social connections that they are actually going to gain from the new housing situation.
Okay, thanks for that. Just looking at the chat, a former colleague of mine, Lynn Livesley, we used to work together, National Housing Federation. Hi there, Lynn.
Hi, Patrick.
You want to articulate basically what you said in your group?
Yeah, so we were just discussing partly the fact that COVID has exposed huge inequalities in conditions around housing in terms of repair, overcrowding, access to green space, and that we need to be investing in neighbourhoods as well as social housing stock to give people the best chance of ageing well, and also through avoiding the unnecessary hospital admissions and tragic admissions into residential care that we've been seeing at the moment, but also to be more imaginative in our approach to thinking about what makes good retirement housing. So while we traditionally invested in little tiny boxes, perhaps what we need are bigger houses that support co-resident and intergenerational family living, so that people can look after each other. So I think it's just about being aware that housing is going to be critical to the Ageing Better policy framework going forward.
That's great, thanks for that, Lynn. I've seen Kate Joplin. Kate, what was your group, and do you want to feedback from your group, Kate?
Hi, sorry, I have no. I'm shadowy presence due to a failing webcam, but I mean, we spent a lot of time being a bit confused, and but we had a really, I think, good conversation about trust and how actually, in the absence of the ability to meet in person, lots of the kind of subtle ways in which we build trust are quite cut off from us. I'm not sure we had particular solutions around that, but obviously I guess the expertise that's been built up in community organisations over a long period in terms of building those trusts, we're having to relearn doing that now in this new virtual environment, and I think that sort of was a bit of a theme, and I've tried to kind of capture some of the other points in the chat. But yeah, that sort of question of how do we kind of translate all that learning from years of doing this in person into the new environment in which we're working, and what bits are urgent to pick up again. Hope that helps.
Thanks. So how we survive the new normal, and then we've got the food group, which I did sit in that one. But anyone from the food group want to say a few words? I know you've got put quite a few things in the chat already, but anyone from the group might want to say, summarise very briefly?
I don't mind summarising. I think I was in one of the food groups. We talked about the kind of looking forward to the winter, so that food banks can't be the only solution, and that a lot of the mutual aid groups that sprung up to support people in diverse communities are still trying their best, but floundering a little bit now as the world opens back up. And what is the role of a kind of statutory organisations in filling the gaps really left by mutual aid groups and local communities, because you know food wasn't culturally appropriate, and a lot of people did a lot of amazing work really locally, but there is now nothing to fill that gap that's now been left. And the winter is coming. Oh god, and we don't know what that brings, and we think a lot of vulnerable people will still be hungry, but without the crisis intervention that COVID brought along. And what are we doing to support the gap that will be left by mutual aid groups and communities?
That's great, thanks. And finally, before I finish, and did anyone talk about funding, supporting BAME-led organisations, or new ways of commissioning, or which obviously is one of the key things in the report? Did anyone touch on that? Yes.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Not so much on the funding side, but it is linked. We were in a group talking about mental health. I was talking about our experiences in terms of Leicester, and how, in terms of how isolated people from Black and minority ethnic communities have started feeling even more, in terms of, because the lockdown has been longer, so many people are shielding, so many people have Leicester, there's been a greater length of time, and I'm really concerned about the impact that's had. And we've had a high proportion of people from BAME communities who have lost loved ones and who are grieving, and who are used to grieving collectively. And you know, the whole funeral process is not just one day. You know, there's a whole range of activities and collective mourning that goes on, and obviously none of that they've not been able to do that, and that's had a huge impact on people. And the other thing that Leicester, and I think this is nationally, because everybody went into this firefighting mode, and it was, crisis mode, the communication was not effective in terms of being inclusive to people who didn't speak English, and so many people were excluded. So when the increases started happening in Leicester, everybody was at a rush. Oh, we need to get translated material. We should have known better. We're so used to working with, minority ethnic communities. These preparations should have been done earlier. And it was only because of the voluntary sector organisations and concerned members of the community who may have been a medical professional or just had a voluntary sector background, who did recordings off their own back with no funding, and shared those recordings of what is COVID, how you need to stay safe, what are the rules, because these people didn't understand, and people who don't have social media, don't have internet, this is even more challenging. So, it's not, we were too behind, and then to say, oh, it's the fault of these communities, it's wrong, and this is what I think we were too slow. And I mean nationally, the government didn't address this.
Okay, we can easily carry on, but I'm conscious that we need to move on to the next part of the session. Yeah. Just want to thank you very much. You might have noticed I'm wearing my Star Trek uniform. I'm a Trekkie, very proud of that. I had a kind of chat with Carol about this yesterday, so just to let you know, I've got my captain's badge. So I'm going to pass the bridge over to who's taking over now. Back to our chair. So
brilliant, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Can I say a very, very big thank you to Patrick, actually. Presentation was so inspirational, Patrick, and the discussion that's followed. Clearly, I think we need loads more time on these discussions all the way in terms of workshops, etc. But I'd like to move on now and ask you to join the panel, Patrick. Along with, we've got Sophie Yarker, we've got Bharti and Rehana. From Leicester, we've got Shelley Khan, and we've got Mohammed Shafiq. So as you know, we've had questions in the chat box. We are running a little bit out of time. I do apologize for that. Clearly, this is one of the challenges of what we're in now and doing Zoom meetings. But if I could take one or two of the questions that have been put in the chat to our panel, that would be great. So the first question is to Rehana and Bharti. So the question is, do you think BAME people with dementia are worse off in regards to isolation? We could just...
Bharti, do you want to take that one?
Okay. I would say yes. And I would back it up with dementia is sometimes something that's not talked about. So it's hidden. So to let the community know, you feel shameful, and so people are not willing to be open about it, and also they don't know what help is available. So it's almost like old age, I have to put up with it. So yes, I would say it is going to be a big factor, and more needs to be done.
Thank you. Certainly what's coming out of all the findings of the research as well, I think, in terms of more needs to be done. So I've got a question for Shelley. So lots of questions about whether there is a difference of how loneliness and isolation is experienced when you are part of a majority or minority community. So that's for Shelley.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think is there a difference? I don't think there's a difference in how loneliness or social isolation is experienced. It's pretty much the same across everybody in any community. What makes it different is the other factors. The factors that you don't speak the language, the factors that you're unable to go out on your own, the factor of fear. Unfortunately, for Muslim communities and the rise of Islamophobia in recent years, a lot of women are very scared to go out, and they've actually faced harassment, they've faced comments, so the fear is great. There's lots of insecurity about the changes to the benefit system that people don't understand. So whilst they may be in a majority community, in an area, quote and unquote, the fear, the loneliness and isolation, it is further compounded by all the social reasons. And that has to be taken on board. And as I've alluded to before, that the whole notion of extended families and people taking care of their elders, that is slowly disintegrating. And we, or funders or commissioners, need to understand that. And as the generation as people are getting older, they will become more dependent on services, statutory services, and there has to be mechanisms put in place to make the services more appropriate and accessible. So it means then, so for example, having carers who speak the language and understand what their needs are, because a lot of those people, just going back to the previous question about dementia, there is a very real need there, because people don't understand the causes of dementia or what dementia is. There, relatives struggle coping with their elders. Very little information. Services for people, older people with suffering dementia or whatever, are very limited culturally. And these are real needs. And it's not necessarily about new funding or new services. It is about making the existing services more appropriate. I hope that's answered the question.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you. And just finally, a question for Patrick. What do you think is the most important thing we can do after today, Patrick?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing, we've got a report. We need to use that report. So I think everyone should share that report with at a local level with councillors, MPs, elected representatives. Is the first thing, so they understand the importance. Race is now back on the agenda. So we need to make sure that this report is used around all the conversations, around all the issues that we've talked about on this event. Secondly, I think from our perspective, Centre for Ageing Better, I've got some of my colleagues online. We will look at the report also to see what can we use to support internally in the organisation to help our thinking and what we need to do around our work around connected communities and the wider work around inequalities, which has an impact on our other aspects of our priority goals. If there are funders and commissions on this line, I think it's important that there's a conversation with them to explore how can they seriously, I mean, I've been involved in some calls organised by NCBO and National Lottery, and there's a concept of developing some kind of endowment fund to support BAME-led services, which is fantastic. But I think in addition to that wider conversation, which will cover all aspects of BAME services, I think there's a business case now to invest in ageing and ethnicity, particularly because we really know that the impact of lockdown and impact of COVID, BAME staff are losing their jobs. A lot of BAME organisations are going down by the wayside. We need a Marshall Plan. We need a Marshall Plan, guys. A Marshall Plan, which is about a 10, 15-year investment to catch up on things that we lost. The impact, I think the caller from Birmingham was talk clearly about the impact of austerity. For anyone that's worked in public health, there's been a massive disinvestment in public health for the last 10 years. We need to get the money back and to invest in communities, invest in people, and to do the things that we used to do back in the day, which made a difference, but was never valued or recognised by politicians or senior civil servants. But now everyone's talking about these issues. Our job is to make the case and advocate and maybe campaign, and campaign for better services and for BAME community voices to be the permission for BAME voices to be allowed to speak as well. We have a voice. Listen to us, listen to our lived experiences, and let's work together.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. I'll certainly hold on to that Marshall Plan. I think there's a great kind of idea that we need to think about. So thank you very much to all our panel members. I know that there were other questions that were asked, and we'll try and address them in the work that we do. And if there are any particular questions for particular speakers, we'll try and get back to you on that. Apologise for the shortness of the time, but that does bring us to very much the end of the main programme. And just one final thing I want to do is something nice to end the conference, really. I'd like to pass on to Carol Ann, who runs Zebra Partnerships and has been very much part of organising this conference and she's got something a little bit special to end the conference with. Over to you, Carol.
Forgotten how to unmute. I want to introduce a very, very good friend of mine. I call her the Greater Manchester Poet Laureate. She's Shirley May. She's a poet, director of Young Identity Writing Collective with 13 to 25-year-old young people. She's performed nationally and internationally. In 2018, the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote, she was chosen as one of the strong Manchester women. Her posters were around Manchester wearing the suffragette rosette. She's really, really well, highly regarded. And she's a visiting teaching fellow at Manchester Metropolitan University's Manchester Writing School. Without further ado, here is Shirley May.
Hello, hi everyone. It's really nice to be asked to come and end the conference with some poetry. Thank you, Carol, for such a wonderful introduction. Now, may I live up to that introduction? I hope so. I know that you've been all talking about what it's like to becoming elderly and what it's like in particular this COVID time. And I look forward to actually having to reading the research that has been done. Now, I wrote a book, like Carol said, I don't know if I'm doing this right, if I've got it in the camera, yeah. And it's called She Wrote Her Own Eulogy. And I was the last of my mother's children born in the UK. And all my mother talked about from being 60 years of age, because you could retire at 60, not now 66 for me, I'm a little bit resentful of that, was all she talked about from 60 till she passed away was dying. And so hence the title of the book, She Wrote Her Own Eulogy. She was the sort of woman that left instructions, and I'm going to start with a poem that is called Gather Unto Me. And it is about death, because the book is called She Wrote Her Own Eulogy. But yeah, so I'll read this. And I wrote this not for my mother, but it is a community poem. And I had gone to a funeral and I brought my daughter with me, and she said, do you think we will do this after you have gone? Because our traditions are changing. And in COVID, we have seen funerals go down from 400, probably is a small funeral, to 10. To now back up to about 30. And it has been a time where people have felt really robbed. So this is called Gather Unto Me, I Say, dedicated to my daughter and Night. Gather unto me, I say, those of you who wear the black cloth, perpetual midweek and always on a Friday. When did you become a partaker of the ritual? When did you become fettered to the 9 nights and a frequent visitor of the house of the dead? Gather unto me all who have embraced the idea of the gathering, for it gains momentum when the first call goes out to Auntie, Churchwoman and Brotherman Shabeens. She brings with her the brethren. She brings unto herself first the Bible. They hold the rod of correction in love, in the hope that just one soul will be saved. He comes with the fire of Ray and nephew, cane white. It burns the back of your throat. It's a different hot. His tongue is laced with bomber clot, ras clot, redemption. He too makes the call. They come with ivory dominoes and embers of fire like soothsayers and mystics. They come with the knowledge of to read the cards in your hand. They are the men and the women who can find the six you hold. He comes with the herb of Solomon, Rizla, matches and no regrets. The two come together, sinner and saint. They spy each other suspiciously. They tell stories and reminisce of good days and bads, of church outings, blues parties, of summers and winters. They be laughing about the coach trips to Skegness, with rice and peas and curry goat in the dinner flask. Someone raises a song, we shall gather by the river, while someone shouts 6 as the domino crashes onto Mama's best dining table. This is the only time she does not have a screw face of resistance. We take more moments to drink and to groan, to mourn and to cry. We pore over old photographs, laughing at the clothes we wouldn't wear today. We see images of our dead and our living together, remembering how those times we had are short, are short, are short. Mama said live, Mama said love, Mama said do, but she said, don't stray far from the ways of our people, for it is important to gather unto ourselves. Okay, so that was the first one. And I thought it was really important because you guys were talking about death, and Carol was saying, don't end on no deathy poems and stuff like that. So, but I thought it was important to have this kind of tradition that we fear will get lost in the host tradition of a small funeral. And it's almost been something that actually has been forced onto us, but we are resisting in our mind. Anyway, the next poem is called Tomorrow. And this is dedicated, if anybody is from Manchester, there was this wonderful, wonderful woman that my mother used to know called Cat Locke. And Cat was a fighter for equality and diversity, especially in education and in health. And there is a health centre named after her in Moss Side. And this is a dedicated poem to Cat Locke, who was my mum's friend. We stand in all our yesterdays where the valiant have once stood, where heroes now stand. We will not flinch nor fall, for we have come too far. So we battle like our queens should. Mothers call to combat like the battalions of our families, all those who would not lie down whilst others took possession of our rise and our fall. Spirited like our mothers' mothers and their mothers before, we did not yield ground, but we braced ourselves for the journey in tall ships to distant shores, a bejeweled cargo of victors and brave women, for we are the jet black, fabulous jazz of isosceles. We stand in all our yesterdays where the valiant once stood, where heroes now stand. You set a path for us to ascend, to find the very best in us as we entered the city gates. We are a people that have battled against those who would try to defeat us. You made us strong. You gave us your voice. You left us your song. You told us to rise on the dawn and to overstand any storm. You made us spirited, for we are Kenya and we are Egypt. We are Senegal and we are Rwanda. We are Mali and we are Libya. We are Madagascar and we are Nigeria. We are Jamaica, Barbados, and we are Trinidad. We people who are called to arms. We are a people called to arms, not afraid. So we stand on all our yesterdays, where the valiant once stood, and we claim all our tomorrows. In this, our victory. We are the jet black, fabulous jazz of isosceles. Okay. So that was written for Cat Locke, and yes, standing against everything like slavery, like coming to a new country, like, yeah, getting older in that place, longing for home, but standing anyway in what is now a new home and embracing home ways. I thought that I would, my mum lived in Moss Side, and so the book has got sections in it that is called Moss Side, it's got Windrush, it's got the things I would teach my daughter about love and men. It's got the Wilsons. And when my mum came, you can see on the front cover of the book, can you see? Normally I have it as a screenshot at the back of me when I'm doing these kinds of events. But my mum came to England as a nanny, and she was based in Tunbridge Wells in London. And she said she was the only black woman in the village. Sorry. I thought it was hilarious that we have a whole new comedy series that has a statement in that is very similar, but she was the only black woman at the time in Tunbridge Wells, or she felt she was. And I'm going to ring two from this section. In fact, there's only two in the section, which is called Tunbridge Wells. It goes. And then Carol, tell me when to shut up, because you know I can do this for hours. Not all, one more poem.
Just this poem, because we've overrun anyway.
Okay, all right. So I'll only do. I won't do Wilson, so you won't get to find about these people on the front. You'll have to buy the book.
Yes, yes, that's a great idea. I've put your details in the chat, but can you do Tunbridge Wells, please?
Oh, do Tunbridge Wells. Okay,
yeah.
Well, you're going to have to do them both. They'll take a second, honestly, literally.
Go.
Not all of us came on the Windrush. My mother once told me this in her old age. She travelled to England first class, ate at the captain's table and danced with Sidney Poitier on a ship called the Queen Mary. She said, thus, dreaming was not just the pursuit of the young. I want to remind you to value your time. It runs away with your life. So that was Not All of Us Come on the Windrush and the Wilsons. And finally, the Wilsons. It's funny how life can shift so quickly when you look after other people's children and lose sight of your own. It's not easy, this place. It's the only my skin. Back home, it was not the case. Well, not in the countryside, where the life of the sugarcane is what most men knew, and the homestead is what a girl is taught at birth. She said her mother had once been accepting of this state. She said, even a country girl dreams of escaping the mundane. Sister and honey, they call me. It not my name. I own both like you were, sorry, excuse me. Sister and honey, they call me. It not my name. I own both like they were my birth names. I wear them on different days. Sister at home, where the work for the sixth child is hard. It's hard for the sixth child, the one in the middle of 12. Honey is my Sunday name. It what my grandmother Rosina called me. She made me special. She taught me to love myself like she was taught by my mother. I don't know how I end up in England. It was not my intention. It's funny how life can shift so quickly. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, whose children Polly and Douglas are my wards, said they had been assigned to England. Did I want to come? As they knew New York was the reason I took the job. I said, no, I'll go home. I have a good life there. Only I end up in a Tunbridge Wells because Polly and Douglas would not stop crying. It's funny how life can shift so quickly. I was only in America 8 weeks. By then, I knew I was pregnant again. So I came to England. Do you know, me mind Polly and Douglas 2 more years for me children end up in the care of the state who did not know how to care them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I hand back to Athia? Thank you so much, Shirley May. That's brilliant.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Carol. I think that was all wonderful, and what a lovely end to the conference. Can I just lastly just do a few thank yous? Can I thank all the Aging Better programs for taking part? All the community groups and individuals have fed into the research. Fantastic work. Patrick Vernon, our keynote speaker, for a very inspirational input, and the conference hosts, Kirsty and Lucy at Ambition for Aging at GMCVO, Micra, especially Sophie for her work on the report, Carol Ann Whitehead at the Zebra Partnership, and particularly Shirley May and Gulshan Bullet for putting those inspirational pieces at the start and at the end of the event. Just fantastic. The National Lottery Community Fund for funding this conference. And most of all of you for attending and making it a real success. We'll be editing the work, the outcome of this conference, looking at the recording, etc. We'll put that back to you all. We'll hopefully all the attendees will get that feedback from the recording, and you'll also get a feedback form. Please do complete that so that we can learn from it and also get that feedback and understand how everybody's taken that. So I hope you all have a very good evening. Thank you so much for staying on beyond the time that was allocated for the conference. I do apologize for that, but it clearly shows that we need more spaces to discuss this issue.
Can I just say quickly, Athia, from everybody, especially the Zebra Partnership and the delivery partners, can we thank you as conference chair for steering this ship in the way you have done today? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Have a good evening.